If you can believe it, there are even more Zion Williamson rumors as the NBA heats up after Bradley Beal's trade. Does Bill Simmons actually know something? Let's try and make sense of what's going on around the Pelicans and the NBA and what it might tell us about the Pelicans' plans this week. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this, I think it's at this point, Tuesday is the show I am recording, and it's all blurring together because of all the news that is coming out, one thing after another, and it's tough to make sense of actually what's going on, but we're going to do our best today, and it might kind of give us some insight into what the Pelicans are planning. So make sure Locked On Pelicans is your first listen today and every day, and become an everydayer. We're here Monday through Friday, not just when rumors start to come up, but every single day giving you the Pelicans coverage that you want to hear. No hot takes or anything like that. None of this offseason stuff should be a huge surprise if you're an everydayer either, as we're giving you, as I said, the insight you want. So subscribe wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube if you want to support the channel. In addition to listening 5 days a week, comment down below on YouTube. So let's get into it, to the more Zion Williamson and the New Orleans Pelicans rumors, which comes from Bill Simmons and his Bill Simmons podcast from The Ringer. And to just basically paraphrase it, he says, a source that he trusts that, well, we'll get into who the source or what the source could be or who the source isn't in a second here, says that Zion Williamson will not be on the Pelicans by Thursday. And Bill Simmons said, like, whoa, wait, really? And the source said, just you watch. Okay. From everything that's been out there right now, like, one, is it a huge surprise if Zion Williamson's traded at this point? Not necessarily. I think it's still a shock, but at this point, I don't think anyone saying anything like that, should a trade happen, means it comes out of nowhere. And what a lot of people do in these situations, and it's like a lot of people who want to kind of break into Pelicans Twitter or some things like that, just kind of start making up rumors based on reading the tea leaves of what people who actually know things are saying. And then if you get a couple of them right, like it's tough to, you can do this pretty well, actually. You've seen grifters and things like that, but that's neither here nor there. You know, Bill Simmons is kind of playing to what the prevailing rumors are out there, and you make an outlandish comment on it like that, and then people go and listen to your show, and it's really sometimes that simple. You know, he said this is but let's assume someone actually told him this and it's not completely made up. You know, he specifically said this is a source that he trusts. It's not, he didn't say it was a source with the Pelicans or with New Orleans. It's some sort of league source, so someone with another team or an agent or something like that. Someone who knows things that he talks to as well. That doesn't give me the highest degree of confidence in him just kind of putting that out there. And Bill Simmons, while he has had some things correct, also gets a whole lot of things wrong because he's not a newsbreaker and it doesn't really matter to his reputation. If Zion Williamson's not traded on Thursday, it doesn't really matter to him at all, and people are still going to go and listen to his show, and it's going to be that. Like, it's not going to impact him in the negative in any sense being wrong. Honestly, being wrong rarely does in this sort of case. So he can put something like that out there. And when there's already rumors of people saying, you know, maybe they are going to trade him, yeah, you can jump on the bandwagon with that a little bit. But as I've reported here, as I've said before, you know, there's, and other people have too, there is some frustration inside Airline with Zion Williamson and his actions. And I want to get into another Zion Williamson rumor here. And this comes from Brian Windhorst on ESPN that says he has no relationship, that says Zion Williamson has no relationship with the front office, with the franchise, and very little relationship with the rest of the team. You know, I saw people trying to debunk this, and I get why people hear Windhorst say something like that and want to kind of rush to the fence and kind of point things, be like, that's definitely not true. Stop, saying negative things around New Orleans and the Pelicans. I don't think that's entirely wrong. I don't think it's no relationship with the front office. I don't think it's like an entirely non-existent relationship with the team. But I mean, you can see this. You can see this. And what Windhorst is saying isn't exactly incorrect. There isn't a great relationship between Zion Williamson and the team. And that's on the team, and that's on Zion Williamson as well for why that is the case. We don't need to rehash all of that. You know, in terms of stuff with the team, yeah, he came back from Portland early last year to spend time with the team for their playoff run, but it doesn't mean he has a great relationship with people. One of the things to note, and you can go back a couple of years and find this out yourself, he hasn't been spending time with the team in the offseason at those organized team workouts and things. You know, they were in San Diego last year, and Zion Williamson wasn't there. The year before, he wasn't there either, partially due to the foot injury. You know, there's been times at Summer League during the foot injury year where he didn't come around at all, and he was in Vegas the same time as the team. No, that doesn't bode well for his relationship with the team. Is he hanging out with these guys on the road, out, when they're in town? I don't believe so. Is he talking with them constantly, texting with them constantly? I don't think that's the case. And that's not inherently a bad thing. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be best friends with the guys on your team. Certainly, Kobe Bryant wasn't particularly close with a number of people. It can be absolutely okay to not do that, and everything can be fine as long as you're a professional and do your job. We've had questions about that with Zion Williamson, though. So to hear people saying all these things, I don't think it's just to kind of like jump on all of this. I do think there's truth to all of that. It doesn't mean that the Pelicans aren't trying to mend that relationship. You know, Gail Benson meeting with Zion Williamson, per Nick Underhill, to tell him, like, congrats on your baby. Perfect. I don't know if that it means you have a good relationship, which means you're interacting, which is better than not. Getting rid of the player performance and care team to appease Zion Williamson is them trying to bridge a gap and to make more of an effort. And now it's got to be on Zion Williamson to reciprocate all of that, should they keep him. But yeah, there's definitely been frostiness around Zion and the team. This is no surprise. So these other rumors, if you want to call them that, like, I don't know if it's anything or if it's just like, okay, I kind of see the way the winds are blowing here, so I'm going to put something else out there with all of that. It's not a huge surprise. And also it can be okay. The chances of a deal getting done, I still think, as I said in yesterday's show, as I've talked about before as well, is harder than not being harder. That wasn't well said. But the chances of it happening are more likely no than yes, even if a deal ends up getting done. But by all accounts, if you're turning over the player performance and care team, you're trying to keep Zion, I believe. It probably means more Ingrams on the block than anyone else. And you also have Zion for 5 years, and those contracts and things like that really kind of play into it. What also might play into it, and what might happen, is Bradley Beal being dealt to the Phoenix Suns for basically nothing. That is intriguing, and I think could impact the way the Pelicans operate, but maybe not in the way that you think. Let's explain what I mean by that and take a look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. You know, there's no manual for life. You don't get to open a PDF and read what you need to do when certain situations arise or when you're feeling a certain way. And if you're not spending that time kind of figuring yourself out, you might not know how to react in any given situation, and it might lead to negative things in your life. So when you spend time focusing on yourself, learning more about yourself, it's just going to make life easier. And it's so easy to caught up in what other people need. Maybe you're not even spending that time for yourself whatsoever. So I've used BetterHelp when times get tough in my life and I need to talk to somebody and I need to just kind of figure out or get some additional perspective on different things and how I should act going forward or what I should do going forward. And it's been a big benefit for me personally. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. What I love is it's entirely online. I don't need to go into an office. I don't need to get in my car and drive. I can do it from home, working it around my schedule. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to you. And all you do is just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at no additional charge. So find more balance, learn more about yourself. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day, We're here Monday through Friday, not just when, rumors heat up trying to take advantage of that. We're giving you shows 5 days a week, giving you coverage like no one else is, insight like nobody else is, and completely free at that. No Locked On Pelicans Plus or anything. And if you want to support the channel, don't give me your money. Just subscribe. Become an everydayer and listen Monday through Friday. And comment down below on YouTube. Do you believe the Bill Simmons rumors or not? Let me know what you think. One thing that's not a rumor anymore is Bradley Beal. Traded to the Phoenix Suns in essentially what was a salary dump for the Suns. This was a steal of a trade. And I don't need to go into all of that. I get their reason for keeping Beal. I get their reason for giving him that Supermax contract they did last summer. I think the one inexcusable thing they did was that no trade clause, which really limited the market for him, along with what the salary will balloon to. But that's going to be what NBA players make soon. When you see salaries that are $57 million, $60 million per season, that's just going to be the norm for top-level players. The no trade clause was, I believe, the only one in the NBA right now. That's not ideal. That limits who you can trade him to, and he essentially controls everything. And that means that the Washington Wizards had to just fail that trade completely, lose that trade completely. And now the Phoenix Suns have a big three, which is terrifying to think about, of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. They still have DeAndre Ayton as well. That is a lot of firepower, and that is something that I love to see in an owner going for it, paying, giving up future assets to try and win a title right now. You also still have the Denver Nuggets in the Western Conference, who just won the NBA title and look dominant, have a deep team, and some of those guys are only going to get better. You also have a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who despite Ja Morant's 30 game suspension, whatever it is, are still going to be fine, and they're going to be in contention. They have a deep team. They have assets to make a move. The Sacramento Kings were apparently calling about Bradley Beal, trying to bring him to Sacramento to pair with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. It's basically, right now, it feels like an arms race in the NBA. And so when you look at that, right, Golden State's still kind of in that mix. You still have the Los Angeles Clippers, who maybe are trying to reunite with Chris Paul if he gets rerouted from the Washington Wizards. They have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. The Lakers are still the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Minnesota went for it last season. OKC is a team on the rise. Dallas has Luka Doncic. They'll re-sign Kyrie Irving because I don't think he has much of a market. And it even sounds like Houston, and we'll talk more about Houston in the next segment a little bit, seems to be going for targeting James Harden, Kyrie Irving, or Fred VanVleet. There's a lot there, and Portland wants to get back into the postseason too if they end up trading the third overall pick. It's an arms race in an insanely competitive conference. Would the Pelicans be better suited to sit this out? Would this be better? And does this play into the maybe trading up for Scoot Henderson and going through a little bit of a mini rebuild or a retool? Does that make more sense for New Orleans to sit this out? And I'm not sure that it necessarily does. Just because other teams are going for it doesn't mean you shouldn't either if you think you can actually open a window and be competitive now. We've seen injuries be a great equalizer, and sometimes depth is just as important. Otherwise, the Phoenix Suns wouldn't have lost to the Denver Nuggets in the NBA playoffs. Otherwise, the Los Angeles Lakers wouldn't have beaten the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round. That was the 2 seed, but they were injured, and that was a really big deal. You can still win even if other teams are good too. And when you're looking at the way the new CBA is going to work and kick in, there's a reason teams are going for it now. There's about a 2-year window for almost all teams before the CBA is going to get too restrictive, and they need to kind of go through a rebuild. And even if you are not an elite team, you might need to do that as well. So is there a point of trying to retool now, being just good enough and still having high salary players on your books, and then you still got to tear it down? Or would it be better to spend right now, really go into the luxury tax and try and be as competitive as possible and try and win a title within the next 2 years? Then you deal with what you've got to deal with. I think either is valid, but just because other teams are competitive, I don't think means you need to try and time your window perfectly. There's always going to be competitive teams. There will always be competitive teams in each conference in the NBA. So being scared of what others are doing, if you think your process is solid and sound, I don't feel is the right move in what you want to do. So even if the new CBA is going to wreck you, might as well go all in right now and try and make it happen. And that'll tie into, as you see the next bullet point here, big name to New Orleans, because maybe that's something that they want to go with, even if that didn't look like on the surface what they would be doing. So the real question with this becomes not, do you time the window now? Do you not? All of this is for naught, by the way, if ownership isn't going to pay. And you've heard me say this almost every single show and every single radio spot I've been on, every single TV spot I've been on. There's been a lot of them the past couple of weeks. New Orleans is one of two teams that has never paid the luxury tax before. Now, they also haven't really been in position to pay the luxury tax. And we haven't truly seen them, have to be like, oh, we got to get rid of a good player because he's too expensive and we don't pay the tax. And they haven't been like actively ducking it or things like that. Though they kind of did at this past trade deadline, more so for this coming season than last season. So they were thinking a year ahead. So maybe that kind of gives you your answer on what ownership is thinking when it comes to this. Maybe. But if ownership's not going to pay, it doesn't matter. Also doesn't mean Gail Benson needs to sell the team. But I am very skeptical if they will pay the luxury tax or if they would pay it for more than one single season. Because we just don't have a track record of them doing that whatsoever. But if they do, if they want to, there is an opportunity to go and do it now and to try and be just as competitive. There is no guarantee that Phoenix Suns team with Bradley Beal, who's missed a ton of games, Kevin Durant, who's missed a ton of games, and then Devin Booker there, along with no depth on that roster whatsoever, can do much of anything. Maybe they could. On paper, they could win a title, but it hasn't happened yet. And if that's the case, look, go for it. The Denver Nuggets, while very, very good, they've been disappointing in the postseason too, and there's some very big, real injury concerns moving forward with them. Sacramento Kings, great story last year. They're going to be able to replicate it again. We'll see. Golden State Warriors, a lot of shakeup going on over there. They'll be competitive, but are they going to be a true title contender? And we've seen New Orleans play all of these teams very well when they've been healthy. So is it better to just bank on health, not trade Zion, Brandon Ingram, and instead add another big name to the roster and make your own big three or add the more right kind of depth? I think that could absolutely be the way to go. And I wouldn't have said this a couple weeks ago till you really start looking at it and go, oh, okay, maybe this is the right time to kind of go for everything. So let's look at that and what that exactly means coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Who's a big name that they could potentially go for? Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Ibotta. We're always throwing money at something. Kids' school supplies, a new house project. The list goes on. And it's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. So enter Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's really that easy. And the average Ibotta user earns $120 a year in real cash back. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. You use that cash back to buy the flight you've been eyeing, that game you've been dying to go to, or that fancy dinner you've been craving. That's a very real one here in New Orleans. And you earn real cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, I-B-O-T-T-A, in Google Play or the App Store and use code LOCKED. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, coming to you like no one else is. The Locked On Network comes to you like no one else does with Locked On's NBA Mock Draft Special. It's here and it's bigger than ever. Follow along with the entire first round in a 6-episode ultimate mock draft experience only Locked On can deliver. All episodes are available now on Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Talked about it yesterday. I took Nick Smith Jr. at 14 for the Pelicans. Go watch the mock draft, get some insight into the draft process over at the Locked On NBA Big Board YouTube page. So we are talking the Pelicans here, though, and maybe going big name hunting all of a sudden when that seemed out of the realm of possibility. If they really want to be in contention, one, you could just run everything back, add a guy at 14, trade that pick, or really just kind of continue on. And you'll be good. I don't know if you would be title contender good, but you could push for a top 4 seed in the Western Conference. I absolutely believe that. But if you really want to jump up, is it time to go after a big name, whether that's in free agency or the trade market? No, Bradley Beal didn't make sense for New Orleans. I'll be honest, Damian Lillard doesn't make sense for New Orleans either, pairing him with CJ McCollum, and CJ would probably have to get shipped back to Portland in that deal. That's never going to happen. That's too weird of a trade to even kind of comprehend. But what about a name like Fred VanVleet? He's going to be a free agent. I don't think he's going to get $40 million or something like that, or a full max deal out there on the market. I do think that you could go and get him. It would have to be a sign and trade with Toronto, so you'd probably be giving up the 14th pick along with something else in there. But he's a lead guard that can shoot, is pesky on defense, and is that a name or the route that the Pelicans really should try and go? I think it sounds good in theory. I don't love the... I think it sounds good on the surface, and then don't really love it in theory either, or in practice. He's a slightly undersized guard, and I don't think New Orleans needs more of that. And if New Orleans is prioritizing long-term sustainable success, this really does hurt that. Fred VanVleet would be above guys like Dyson Daniels, Jose Alvarado. And look, Alvarado's an awesome player, but let's be honest, he's not like a superstar in the league or a guy you need to build your team around, as much as I love him and like having him on the team and want him playing. If you can upgrade that spot, you upgrade that spot. But it's going to stunt the development of a guy like Dyson Daniels for sure. If you do end up drafting someone at 14 and also getting Fred VanVleet, I do think, you probably can't take a guard. And if you do, what's that mean for their development as well? So if they want to go in, you're looking for something else, whether it's another big man. Karl Anthony Towns probably could be had for the right price, though I'm not a big Karl Anthony Towns fan. Personally, I don't know how he really impacts winning. And my God, his comments the other day of saying, like, when I'm done, they're going to say I changed the game. And it's like, no, they're not. No, they're not at all. You probably need to get out of the first round. So I'm just not a Karl Anthony Towns fan. Just not. I think Kyrie Irving, if you're going big name hunting there, is a little too chaotic for this team. Is going to command too much money, though. His market's going to be depressed, and I don't know if he'll get as much money he's thinking, other than if it's going to come from the Dallas Mavericks, certainly. So it sounds great to try and do this. And if the right trade materializes, really go for it. But of all the names kind of being rumored out there, I really don't think there's a way to add to this team without giving up Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. And that's kind of what you would need to do, right? You can't go and get Jaylen Brown, I don't think, without giving up one of those two. Even if Boston would trade him, you can argue whether he's better than B.I. or not. He's certainly a better two-way player. Is he a better offensive player? I'm not sure. But when you look at some of the other names that could be moved, there's OG Anunoby, but I don't know if the Toronto Raptors are actually ever going to move him. And we've heard reports recently that they are very difficult to deal with. So I don't know even if you want to engage trying to trade with them. You could probably pry Julius Randle and bring him back to New Orleans from the New York Knicks. But with Zion Williamson, that pairing is a little bit too redundant. So until I find a name that you're like, oh, that dude is actually gettable and makes a ton of sense, it's not going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because he would be perfect. I can see New Orleans wanting to kick the tires on a number of guys and try and do this. I just struggle to find an actual trade that makes sense. So if they're going to try and improve, I think it would be, around the margins, keeping Zion, keeping B.I., keeping CJ, build your team up a little bit. Maybe Porzingis is in there somewhere. I don't know if that's considered big name hunting at this point, though. Big is certainly, a word to describe him. You can go into the luxury tax, but then you don't go deep into the luxury tax. A guy like Porzingis would put you deep into the luxury tax, and you're really going for it. And I just don't think Porzingis is going to be the guy that's that's the missing piece, and that's who's going to win you a title. So if you can get a guy like Gary Trent Jr., others around the edge that give you more depth, Malik Beasley still might be available from the Los Angeles Lakers. All of those things I think are incredibly useful, those type of moves, and that could be exactly what the team needs. So no Fred VanVleet, anything like that I think is going to end up happening, but I could see New Orleans still trying to trade things because they seem like they want to really shake things up this offseason, and I'd love to see them just not being totally complacent while having some continuity within this team and some familiarity with one another still, and I think that could be a big thing. So let me know what you think about all the Zion Williamson rumors in the comments down below. What do you think is going to happen at the NBA draft? A lot more to come this week. There's going to probably be new rumors tomorrow. We'll try and make sense of all of that. So make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with you all tomorrow.